Some suspenders, Keith? It's like it's a good look.
It is.
It's been a long time since I've been in an office, but I am. Been a long time since I had a tie on. I had to remember how to tie it.
Yeah, very, very formal. You look like you could be working on that homicide that's been just bugging you for the past 20 years, but you finally got back to the case.
Before I retire, exactly.
He needs a fedora.
So Keith, where are you at?
I'm in Houston, where it's awfully cool. It's just like Tahoe, mid-70s, low 80s.
Yeah, right.
I landed in Austin. It was 106.
Are you guys okay back there?
It's hot. It's so hot that it cools off to like in the 90s about 7 o'clock at night, and it feels cool.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Lake Tahoe VHR Advisory Board meeting. We had a little break in June, and we're happy to be back. Both Keith and Patty, as you can see and hear, are attending online. I know that's not their preference, but it couldn't be helped. So I'm going to confirm that you both can hear me. Pat?
Yes.
Okay, very good. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Lauren.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That sounded like we had a big crowd, didn't it? Okay. We will start with opening public comment, and we're going to start with Lauren. She has a statement.
Yep, I just wanted to take a minute to address my involvement in the group drafting the referendum regarding VHRs in Douglas County and the many misunderstandings around that. I have always worked to find a balance needed to help this program meld in our neighborhoods. When I heard about the referendum, I was concerned that it could be terribly unbalanced, banning VHRs in some neighborhoods while inundating others. This is antithetical to my beliefs as to how we make this program work. I decided to lend my thoughts to the process. I received an early draft of the referendum and provided my insight about balance and fairness. My involvement ended there. I am currently not involved in promoting the referendum and have no plans to be involved in the future. I am not working to ban VHRs in Douglas County. I am not opposed to the VHR program. I am, in fact, a VHR and a holder of a VHR permit. Going forward, I will continue to seek balance and serve with impartiality in my role as a member of the VHR Advisory Board. It is not an ethical violation to believe a balanced approach is important and trying to ensure that happens. I have always worked to meld VHRs into our neighborhoods, and we have a long way to go. I will continue to work to find a balance between VHR use and permanent residency, and between private property rights and the peaceful enjoyment of my property. And I like having prepared statements because then I don't go on forever. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, at this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker unless additional time is granted by the board chairperson. The Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board uses a timer to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. We'll start the timer when you begin, and you will be told when you have 30 seconds left and should conclude your comments. Once your time is up, please sit down. Is there any opening public comment? Seeing none, I will close opening public comment, and we'll go on to the approval of the agenda. For possible action, approval of the proposed agenda. The Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board reserves the right to take items in a different order to accomplish business in the most efficient manner, to combine 2 or more agenda items for consideration, and to remove items from the agenda or delay discussion relating to items on the agenda. For possible action, discussion to approve the draft minutes. Oh, never mind. I forgot. I moved on so fast. We need a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Glenn. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Patty. No discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda as published? Aye.
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 Thank you, 5-0. Now we'll go to, for possible action, discussion to approve the draft minutes of the April 26, 2023 meeting of the Vacation Home Rental Advisory Board. They were posted in the website, and I believe you were at that meeting, Glenn?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
there.
So, is there any questions, concerns, or anything on the minutes? If not, I will take a motion to approve the minutes.
I read the revised one. I motion to approve the minutes
Thank you,
as
Glenn.
submitted.
Any second?
Second?
Thank you, Patty. So I have a motion, I have a second to approve the minutes as drafted. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 5-0, thank you, the minutes are approved. Moving on to the administrative agenda. The chairperson will read the agenda title into the public record and will have the discretion to determine how the item will be presented. The timing for agenda items is approximate unless otherwise indicated for a specific item. Agenda items may be considered ahead of or after the schedule indicated by this agenda. Public comment may be taken on items that are identified for possible action at the discretion of the chairperson. Okay, so item number 1 for possible action, review for renewal of a Tier 3 VHR special use permit for 230 Terrace View Drive, Zephyr Cove, Nevada 89448, APN 13182371030, owners Douglas and Sandra Kraus. The permit was originally issued on July 9th, 2022, and conditionally approved on October 26th, 2022, pending review of the following item. Verification that there have been no complaints lodged against the VHR. Ernie Strelo has the floor.
Good afternoon, all 4 of you and board. And Keith and Patty, you can hear me okay? I kind of,
Yeah.
I talk very quietly, I know, but, okay,
Yeah, you're fine.
okay.
I hear you.
Just want to make sure everybody hears. Ernie Strelo for the record. On October 26, 2022, the VHR Advisory Board held a hearing regarding the application for a Tier 3 special use permit at 230 Terrace Drive. At the conclusion of the hearing, board member Patty Graff had stated that she wanted to cycle through this one and come back next year, which is why we're here today. And if there are no complaints, if it's the same for next year, then let them have the Tier 3 without review, unquote. She subsequently made the following motion to approve the 230 Terrace View Drive to receive a Tier 3 permit and then come back this next year, and the motion passed 3-1. So the Tier 3 VHR renewal permit that we're talking about today is a conditional permit for 230 Terrace View Drive. As of July 7th, 2023, no complaints have been lodged against the VHR and no enforcement action has been taken by the county. A month ago, I did approve a provisional renewal pending the next board meeting because we haven't had one in 3 months, I believe. So this application comes before the advisory board as a renewal application. In your packet, I attached the packet that I did last year and the staff report at that time. And this morning I sent out a supplemental packet that you should have been notified of as well from the board president to look at the noise information that Mr. and Mrs. Kraus sent. Did I see that right? Kraus? Yeah. Mr. and Mrs. Kraus. And it's quite lengthy, so I didn't have a chance to review it, so hopefully somebody did. But I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Rennie. Okay, before we hear if you have a statement, I would like to know if this board has any questions for Ernie on this matter. No?
Just that he reviewed the application for renewal and it was compliant with the requirements.
Okay.
Ernie Strelo for the record, it was complete, it was compliant.
Okay.
As I mentioned, all the paperwork was there, and there was nothing in Citizen Serve that we have a record of for this address. So we did notice the neighbors, so everybody was invited, all your neighbors around.
It was advertised and that kind of thing, so that if there were any neighbor complaints, they could show up, and I'm assuming the two of you in here aren't here for that, so, okay. Did you have a statement you'd like to make? I mean, you're welcome to speak, or we can continue our discussion.
I mean, for me, nothing has changed. I'm still doing what I've been doing, trying to be a good neighbor, and, vetting who I let in, and really keeping an eye on things. I have my camera on my garage, so I watch that way. I have the noise aware, so I try to be very vigilant with the people that I have in our house.
And you still live on Catherine Court there, close by?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what's the occupancy of the house?
16.
16?
Yeah, okay.
That's
Keith
true.
or Patty?
Yeah, we're going to questions for the applicant.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my first question is on the supplemental that came out and I'm going to go a little bit. It's page 8 of the supplemental, which is the first page of the actual noise monitoring results. And so I don't know if people are there yet, but it's the week of November, and I'm going to go to week of November 21st through the November 28th, just because it's a cleaner look. And so the axis description is noise risk score, and I was wondering how that's determined, how many decibels that is. I'm assuming that is a preset from Noise Aware or something, but I was wondering, did you set that yourself, and how does noise risk score relate to decibels?
That is something that was set by Noise Aware. I don't have any control over that. They take their readings not just for decibels, but they take other things into consideration also. And I am not sure of the algorithm that they use for that, but that is something that they have figured out, and that's what they use.
We could supplement
Okay.
later.
Yeah, I mean, if I could get that from them if that's something that you'd want to see.
It would be, and I know as unfair as it is, you are kind of test cases here. So I would like to understand exactly what that is. Now, if you wouldn't mind going to page 18 of 23 of the same criteria, I mean, of the same package, and go to the week of May 8th through the May 15th.
Okay.
And if you see that score, and if I understand right, the bottom at the horizontal axis, I think what this is doing is showing you said things, I think, during quiet periods, so I guess I'd like to ask that. The big marks are 11 p.m. to 11 a.m., but it's a little bit before that. Have you set these risk scores to start at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., or what,
Yes.
what do the boxes actually start as?
Yes, and I would have to go through, but yes, I follow all of our Noise Aware. It starts at 9.
Okay.
And goes till 8 in the morning.
Okay. So if you go to that first day, it would, my guess is if that's going from 11 p.m. to 11 a.m., about dead middle of that, which would be 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, the noise risk score, there's 2 readings. One goes over an 80% score, one goes to the 100% score. Yet I can't see that an alert was sent. Have you set alerts?
So if you'll notice that is a reading from the backyard, which is outside. So it could have been anything, it could have been a car going by, it could have been a chain, it could have been any noise that it was picking up. Noise aware, the noise has to continue for, I believe it's 10 minutes before I get an alert. So it's not like if somebody slams a door that I get an alert that says, oh, there's been a noise. So it has to be ongoing noise and then I get an alert.
Yeah, that's why I picked up that if you look very closely at that line, it actually does look like it continues. I mean, these would be, I don't know if these are 10-minute increments, but it's not just one small line. There's actually one line going above 80%, again, noise risk score, I don't know what that means, how many decibels. And then the next is 100, which you can't go over 100, so we don't know how high that is. But
Right.
there is some continuation there. It doesn't look like a slamming of the door or someone screaming. Because again, there are two lines next to each other, both going above the threshold you've set, yet no alert was sent. That was the reason for my question.
Yeah, you have,
So how many rentals did you have during this period? Because you've got a lot of just absolutely blank, and I'm wondering if that's that kind of a not rental or what these are. How many times did you rent the properties since this noise monitoring began?
oh, I've had this noise monitor in place since 2020. So.
Okay, but I mean, the information we got here starts in November of 2022. How many rentals did you have since November 2022?
Oh boy, I'd have to go back and count. I can't tell you, I'm sorry, off the top of my head.
I guess I'm just looking, did you have occasional, or were they normal, or was it, you didn't rent any? Because there's just a lot of blank space there. I'm just kind of wondering what that is.
Yeah, and actually, it was pretty normal. And actually, that date that you're looking at, May 8th through the 15th, we were empty during that time. I did not have any guests there. So that was some external noise. I don't know, I mean, it doesn't tell me what it is, but we didn't have guests in the house at that time.
Keith, I'm just gonna interject real quick here. What day is trash day?
Thursday.
Okay. I just was wondering if it was a trash truck or that kind of thing.
Right.
Go ahead.
So, I didn't hear what you said. There were several people talking. What?
Are you talking to me, Keith?
Okay, Keith, I asked her what day was trash day, thinking maybe
Oh,
the
okay.
noise was trash day, but it's Thursday is trash day. This is a Monday.
Yeah.
And then, I don't
Yeah,
know if you heard her say she was not rented during this period of time.
Okay. All right. Again, it was a pretty continued loud noise. So, okay, just interesting. And so if you'll go to page 20 of 23, if you go into the week of June 4th, so just a couple of weeks ago, quite a bit of noise starting at 4 p.m. continues over a little bit into quiet hours. You got a gray box that goes into quiet hours. Was that a rental? I mean, it looks like a rental. I mean, it's actually interesting how you can tell the day patterns are actually starting to kind of build. So I'm assuming that is a rental?
Yes, and I did get an alert on that, and I did contact the guests.
Yeah, because I could see, it does look like there's a circle right after 4 p.m., so that's what I was going to ask. Okay, I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Keith. Patty, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions for
No.
permit holders? Okay, then I will bring it back to the board to discuss or make a motion.
I make a motion to
Okay.
approve the renewal.
Excuse me, 1 second, AJ.
I doubt there is any, but you just need to ask for public comment.
Oh, good point. Thank you. Any public comment regarding this matter? Seeing none, we'll close public comment, bring it back. Let me just hand him over the, I'm looking for the, sorry guys, the motion. Okay, oh, is it, oh, you know what, I have it. I just want to give it to you so you get the motion. Correct, so for the record. Sorry. Okay.
With a motion, we take a vote. Can I make a comment beforehand?
Yeah, we'll have
Okay,
discussion
since
after. the motion.
Discussion after, gotcha.
Sure.
Sorry,
Okay,
I'm,
go ahead.
Uh,
Oh,
I move we approve the Tier 3 permit for 230 Terrace View renewal.
And this is AJ Hames, DA's office for the record. Just to clarify, it's an unconditional renewal at this point. No need for them to come
They
back. to
seem
me.
like excellent hosts, and I don't see any neighbors complaining, so I see no reason to make it conditional.
All right.
thank you.
Can you read that?
you need to read the recommended.
Unconditionally approve the renewal of Tier 3 VHR special use permit for 230 Terrace View Drive based on their continued compliance with all regulations.
Thank you. Glenn, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, now we'll have some discussion. Lauren, you had,
I do. I was not here for the October meeting, and I have been reading through all of these things. My concern here, and I know where you guys are, you're approving something that you approved conditionally under the fact that there's no noise. We have a program right now to basically say if you want more people, you have to have more space, basically because there's more noise, there's more problems, you need more parking. And so I probably would have objected to the Tier 3 at the time. However, let me say this. I'm also very happy to see that we might be able to nuance where we are with Tier 3s, especially when we're talking about an owner who lives locally, that kind of thing. However, I don't see us have that program in place right now. So this is, my vote is not a reflection on the two of you and how you're doing, because it looks like you're doing a fantastic job, and you might be the forefront of the people who allow us to make, you might be the forefront of the people who allow us to make some better recommendations to that, but I don't think we're there yet. And because I wasn't here in October and voiced that, I'm just not in the same spot that they are, but it's not a reflection on what you're doing, and I think it's great.
so I have a motion by Glenn, a second by Patty. All those in favor of unconditionally approving this Tier 3, signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. And nay?
Nay.
Okay, so 4-1. Thank you very much for coming in again, really appreciate it.
Thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to agenda item number 2. For possible action, presentation regarding ordinance 2023-1617, an ordinance amending various provisions for chapter 20.622 of the Douglas County Code relative to VHRs within the Tahoe Township, and discussion of possible amendments to neighborhood density. Before we get into this, I think most of you know, all 2 of you know, that they passed the new ordinance, the commissioners, and it went into place June 15th, was that the date?
Yes, ma'am.
So the county commissioners have tasked us with looking at the neighborhood by neighborhood study that we looked at previously last year, before you were here, Glenn. And they have asked us to make recommendations on density changes within that study. I made some suggestions that are actually published of how we could possibly go about doing this, because there's 39 neighborhoods. So I kind of grouped them in what I thought were similarities. But before we get into that, I thought it would be a good time for us to talk with Chris from the fire department and ask some of the questions that we continually get questioned on in both public comment and in letters. So we'll move to item 2 and get into it. But first, I thought if we had some questions for Chris, or if he had something he wanted to share with us, that'd be great.
Start with questions.
Okay, start with questions. I'm going to start with the obvious one, because we get so many letters about the IFC, which I now know means International Fire Code, and that a lot of people feel that our neighborhoods are unsafe because they don't fall under the regulation of the IFC. So I thought if you could explain to us an explanation we could give to
Sure.
these folks.
So the code that's, Chris, roll out for the record. The code that's consistently brought up is the 2018 International Fire Code. And specifically, the segment of the code that's brought up is in one of the appendix, I think it's Appendix D, which talks about road widths, and road widths being 20 feet as a requirement in the fire code. So I'll give you an example. A new neighborhood up here, the Beach Club. The Beach Club meets those requirements set forth in the IFC because it's a new neighborhood. Sierra Colina is a new development in the Tahoe Township. Sierra Colina meets those requirements of the IFC because it's a new development. You don't look, as much as someone like me being in code would like to, I don't get to take code and say, well, this is where I'm at today, and apply existing code or new code to existing neighborhoods that were built. Some of our neighborhoods were built in the early 1900s. If we look at an area like Lincoln Park or Lincoln Highway, Old Lincoln Highway, some of those cabins in there are from the turn of the century. So road widths in there don't meet the requirements. Some of those requirements are for 2 ways in, 2 ways out. There's also requirements that say that they have to meet our requirements of our largest apparatus for width and weight. But I don't get to go back into an existing neighborhood like Elks Point and say that I'm gonna apply that. If I did, I would say that we can never allow a new home to be built in there. We can't allow remodels to be built in there, because those new homes or the remodels don't meet the requirements of the fire code. We're still allowing new homes to be built in there. We're still allowing remodels to happen in there, both from a community development standpoint and a fire department standpoint. And nothing's changed in there. We haven't rezoned it. It hasn't been rezoned as commercial use. It hasn't changed from residential to hotel use, which would say that then maybe I could look at the code and say we're gonna change the area here, but neither the planning department or above that, the Supreme Court made a decision that it's not commercial in the state of Nevada, that we don't get to call VHRs commercial. So there's been no change in zoning, so we can't, I think the argument to look at it from a road width standpoint, why I understand the impassioned pleas about it in the event of a major wildfire. It is a real thing, and it is a scary thing. That's why, like, when the city decided to evacuate all of South Lake Tahoe for the Caldor fire, it was before the Caldor fire had made it into the basin, but it looked like it was coming into the basin, so they wanted to give everyone ample time. There is a reality that no part of this basin does a great job for evacuating the amount of people that could be here at one time, but VHRs don't change that reality.
Okay, let me see if anyone else wants to ask questions, and then I might ask a follow-up.
I don't know the code, but basically if somebody is renting long-term or somebody's renting for 27 days, which is the difference of what our domain is, it doesn't make any difference in the code. They don't address somebody that would be renting for 6 months versus somebody that's renting for 4 weeks. Code.
Crucial that for the record, that's correct. I mean,
Okay.
the code doesn't distinguish, but it's more specific than that. This is a residential neighborhood, and it doesn't distinguish how that residential neighborhood or that house is being used.
So it
Whether
should be-
it's a long-term rental or a short-term rental.
So it should be used against every property equally for the code. That's how it was intended.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lynn, when you do speak, if you would say your name, because
Oh.
Katie back there has to transcribe these
I'm
notes.
sorry.
And
New member. Co-op.
That's why I'm pointing it out for you. Yeah, so that way when she
Yeah.
hears.
Glenn Wolfson.
Thank you. And do you have any other questions for Chris? Or comments, or, well, I know you might, but I meant Glenn. You have-
Nikki.
Oh,
Excuse me, Nikki, Patty Graff, I have a question for Chris.
okay, go ahead.
Chris, is there any neighborhoods that you feel that have a higher population of VHRs that have the small roads that you worry about getting your fire equipment in there?
First, for the record, the VHRs and the way that the county has, specifically this board has addressed the issues with parking, and addressed the issues with, both density and the number of cars that are allowed, don't change the realities that some areas are one way in and one way out. An area that's brought up, pretty consistently, it goes by different names, but down by Cave Rock, the neighborhood on the water there. That area, there's not a good way out of that neighborhood, whether it's a VHR guest or a permanent resident. When I have to go into that neighborhood, it's always interesting coming out of that neighborhood no matter what. So the reality of a vacation home rental with 2 cars, most of the driveways in there can't support, none of the driveways in there can support more than 2 cars. And if the garage is clear, it might make a 3rd car, does not change our access ability. I don't know if that answers your question.
So you're probably like Lincoln Park, Pittman Terrace, those, yeah, those fun ones. Keith?
Keith Barr for the record. I guess my question is this issue, and again, working on the thing about, it doesn't matter if there are 2 cars there for a VHR, 2 cars there for a resident. Have we considered just the overall status in these neighborhoods? I mean, if the streets aren't 20 feet long, 20 feet wide, is there a process that the county should be going through to create some kind of no parking sign that's actually enforceable, that people get towed if they park there? Because it seems like to me, if there's if on-street parking is an issue with a fire truck, it doesn't really matter if that's a resident or a VHR. That fire truck's got to get by, and it seems like we don't enforce parking at all. And I don't know, I haven't actually understood why that is, but is there a process that the fire department could be going through that in these neighborhoods with narrow streets to come up with a no parking solution over and above VHRs?
Of course, for the record, so we would have to look at that area by area because they're like private communities, like Elks Point, if they wanted to do that. Part of the issue becomes, as you've already mentioned, enforcement. I would definitely defer to our DA for that. The fire code, in conjunction with Douglas County Title 20, does give us the ability to cite with the DA. As everyone knows, in Tahoe, there has been issues with citations being enforced in Nevada as a whole. It's very difficult with state law to get anyone towed. You have to mark a car for longer than 24 hours. You have to notice it correctly. This is at the casino properties. They can't just tow somebody. Nevada had changed that law a little while ago, and it was largely driven out of Clark County from my understanding. But we could work with the Sheriff's Department and the DA to try to address that, but I do believe it would be more of a neighborhood by neighborhood. But again, I'll defer to AJ on that.
They seem to be able to do it at Zephyr Cove on 4th of July, but no other time for some reason. And I don't think that Nevada law changes, so it's just always been interesting to me.
Glenn Wolfson, for the record. I live in Zephyr, and I can tell you, well, on our side of Highway 50, I don't want to speak to Highway 50 because I think the problem with Highway 50 is they don't have enough parking for the people that are attending the events. And the county, if they really wanted to solve the problem, they would figure out a way either with shuttles or parking or something to prevent anybody opening a door on Highway 50 and getting their car rammed, which I think is crazy. But as I'm in a neighborhood which is all public streets and the standard not like in Elk Point, we have a sign in there that basically says no parking on the streets, but mostly because of the snow removal problem, and nobody really does. And if somebody did park on the street, it's because they're visiting for dinner or something, and if the car's within an hour, the neighbors won't say anything, and if the car is still there overnight, a neighbor would tell somebody. So we don't actually have a problem in Zephyr. I drive in there every day back and forth, and I rarely seen a car that would be ticketable, put it that way. So I think in the public neighborhoods, I don't think it's much of an issue in our neighborhood and probably in most of the others. A fire truck drives through and goes around the circle at the top every so often just to make sure they can get up there.
Thanks, Glenn. And I think also your GID, is like mine does, handles the parking issues for the small neighborhoods, because I'm in Zephyr Cove, across the street from you, and we don't have parking on the street problems because we have a lot of signage. And like you said, neighbors will handle the problem.
The GID has little placards that they're supposed to put on the windshield if somebody parks illegally to like be a friendly warning.
Right.
I've never had to use one, and I think it's a pretty rare occurrence. I think if there was, the neighbors would certainly stand behind the fire department and do everything they could, but I don't think there's a problem with fire engines getting in there, and we're one of the older neighborhoods with narrow streets, especially in winter.
Yeah. But you also have 2 entrances.
True.
I don't know if you can get through to the Knolls, and that would be a 3rd entrance, because I can
No,
figure out
they're
if that
not
works.
connected.
But it's some of these neighborhoods that have only one in and out road can be kind of tricky, I would imagine. Anyway, we're getting off subject. Keith, did you have, Patty, was your question answered?
Yes, it was, and I think a lot of the parking enforcement is up to the sheriff's department rather than the fire department.
Yeah.
Unless the fire department needs to get in there or they're actually doing their patrol, but most of the actual day-to-day patrol, that's up to the sheriff's department, not the fire department.
Yeah.
As far as my understanding is.
Yeah. So this is Keith. My closing comment on this would be, I think we ought to be very careful with this issue. I don't know what your property taxes have done. My neighborhood has taken a lot of measures trying to get a reduction in our fire insurance. And we're going to start putting in the public domain that fire trucks can't get to some houses. VHRs might be a minor inconvenience compared to your fire insurance bill. So I just think we need to be careful how we talk about these neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Keith, I think we're trying to talk sort of generically, actually, about just some of the neighborhoods are more unique than others, where you put in a maximum of the 15% vacation rentals in there. That might add 30 or 40 or 50 more people to the neighborhood. And from a fire standpoint, is there an evacuation issue? And I think you've answered that question, Chris, that the more people there are, the more difficult it's going to be to get people out. But moving on, is there any other questions regarding fire safety for Chris? No. Okay. Then let's move on to our item number 2. And what my plan was for this was for us to just not make decisions today, but to come up with a plan on how we want to tackle what's been tasked to us by the Board of Commissioners. I want to be clear to all of you that I know we looked at the neighborhood study last year, earlier, or this year, and decided to pass on it, but they have made it very clear that they want us to look at this study, they want us to make recommendations, and they want those recommendations by October. If we don't do the discussion and make recommendations, then Ernie and the staff will make recommendations to the county commissioners if we can't come up with any. So I would like to see us figure out how we want to tackle this and work on a plan today. What I've done, like I said, if you look at page is that 114, it's the list of all the neighborhoods, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they're kind of grouped together: Kingsbury, multifamily, Glenbrook, all of the little neighborhoods along Lincoln Highway, and then you've got Cave Rock, Zephyr Heights, the areas that are on the mountainside, and then Round Hill, that kind of things. So anyway, you can see on that we've grouped them together, and then Ernie's data has been placed in there in a more reduced form so that there's not so much to look at. I know that I heard a couple of comments that there was a lot of information in there, and there was. And I'm hoping everyone's familiar with these neighborhoods, because that's going to make it easier for us to get through this. But I am open to hearing, if you hate the idea of grouping it, then please let me know. I am not a dictator.
Glenn Wilson for the record. I noticed some neighborhoods have a homeowners association. Some, like Zephyr Cove, may have a GID. But I think where the GID is really the government, the homeowners association deserve maybe some input, and I would want to know if we can delegate to those neighborhoods that actually have a homeowners association the synopsis of what they believe is compliant with their neighborhood, so that those individual ones, the community property rights supersede the individuals. In neighborhoods like mine, the individual property rights are not superseded by an individual. A neighbor might complain, but not. But we should give credence to the neighborhoods that have homeowners associations about density and let them have input instead of choosing it for them.
So rather
Because when they
than-
bought in there, they they consented to be a part of a community that made the decisions. So I wouldn't want to take that away from those communities.
And that's a good point, and might be a good way to reach out to people. But you're saying not the GIDs, just the
No,
HOAs.
because they're government,
GIDs
they're
don't
not
have any power.
and there are different rules in each of the GIDs.
Right.
They're not a homeowner association. Like in my neighborhood, it's only to take care of the snow in the roads,
Right,
really.
right.
But I heard it like Kingsbury, I was explaining how they have many more duties. So I would stick to homeowner association, which is a private consent to abide by the community rights.
And you're suggesting then we contact their board and see
See
what
what they would
their-
like to do about density, and then we should concentrate on those areas that are non-homeowner associations.
Okay.
That might limit our work a little. I'm not sure how many homeowner associations there are.
I'm not either, but there's a lot just up by Lawrence. Ernie?
This is Ernie Strelo for the record. So we have 187 homeowner associations in Tahoe Basin. There's homeowner associations that are part of homeowner associations, based
How
on
many in
filings with Las
Douglas
Vegas.
County that have rentals?
180, what you just said.
In Douglas County?
In Tahoe Township,
Oh, but,
187.
okay.
So-
Well, that's much bigger than Douglas County.
It was a 3-year project that one of our staff members did.
Hey James, for the record, just to clarify, Tahoe Township is the Tahoe portion of Douglas
Right,
County.
east.
Okay,
Those
so
are-
do we have a significant number of homeowner associations, like they said Elks Point, or?
Right.
Ernie Strelo for the record. So we've counted about 6 that have actual, that we visited in the past that have bylaws that we have copies
Documents
of,
with
that
everything.
actually match, because when I first started, I went and I got a copy of all the bylaws, and with AJ, we went through them and verified that the density that we currently had on record is equal to what the density is listed in their bylaws, right? And the rules aforementioned, because Glenbrook had a change like 6 months ago where they changed member to member from anybody renting over there, so we changed the rule on that. So, but most of the other neighborhoods, there's HOAs, but we can't find any data, there's no HOA active right now.
At the last
Other than
meeting,
filing.
there was a question of somebody renting without permit from his neighborhood. So, I mean, that was a significant question. What I'm saying is, for this, we should maybe err on the side of deferring to homeowner association neighborhoods what they decide is proper. If, for instance, I'm not saying that the Pinewell condo is across the street from where I am, but if everybody there was an out-of-town owner and they all wanted to rent it and they all agreed, I would be okay with that. That's their neighborhood. They signed on to abide by it. But if they decided they only want 10% to be rentals, then they should be able to decide that for themselves, because they all consented to whatever their homeowner association was when they bought in to agree to that. So I would want to delegate those decisions to the private neighborhoods that have documents, like the guy that came and said he doesn't even have permission to rent in the neighborhood, he's violating our documents.
Go ahead, Lorraine, for the record. I agree with you, however, I think what you're saying is the way we do it. If we have a 15% right now in neighborhoods, if there is an HOA that says they'll only go 10%, we do defer to that HOA. Because
Yes.
Douglas County
that.
cannot come in and do that. So I think what you're saying, which I agree with, is already being done.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't
So,
clear. Like,
I just want to, yeah, I'm sorry.
AJ Ames for the record, just to clarify, our code requires the county not to issue permits in neighborhoods where they are prohibited. And so as part of that, what Ernie and his team seek to do is they also honor density limitations when they know about them. So that is, now I will say that as a county, we do not revoke permits. And so if someone is issued a permit and then their HOA subsequently changes their rules and prohibits VHRs, we might cease from issuing new permits in that neighborhood, but we would not, at this point in time, under our current code, go in and revoke permits already issued. So there are some.
That would be fair.
There are some neighborhoods where individuals have a VHR permit and the HOA currently prohibits all VHRs. And then it becomes a legal issue, and there's lawsuits amongst those homeowners and their HOAs about whether those new rules apply.
If there were new rules, they have a right to complain.
That's the
Right.
argument. So it's just something to keep in mind as we
Okay.
discuss density. I think it's a good idea to seek input from HOAs, but just understand that that's a contractual relationship between a homeowner and an entity. And while we, in our code, endeavor to follow those limitations, it is a distinct relationship that the county operates independently of that, so.
Okay. Lauren?
Lauren Romaine for the record. I need to go back a minute to just kind of the way that it was characterized. I don't believe that this board passed on the recommendations. I believe this board, and this is where it's been misunderstood, and I've heard this before, where we passed on the recommendations. I believe we looked at the different things that were being written down to exclude a neighborhood and felt that they were not appropriate things to exclude a neighborhood for. I think the board did do a look at the recommendations and did not agree. There's a big difference between not agreeing and just passing on them. I just need to me, this is just kind of mischaracterized. And then we did make recommendations, and the recommendation was to treat all neighborhoods fairly at 15%. I mean, that is a recommendation. That is what, we had discussions. I know I've been very vocal about the fact that when you start putting, it's a gated community, or it's a this community, or it is a, what concerns me is us doing anything that sets up a system that allows the most verbal voices, the people who have the time and the money to fight VHRs in their neighborhood just because they don't want them there. And then that creates a system where instead of now everyone having the same amount, you now have some neighborhoods that get special entry, what's the word I want?
Constraints.
Now, treatment, thank you, preferential treatment, thank you, I was like, preferential treatment, and I'm sorry, but that to me is not okay. Now, I understand that we're being tasked with this again, but I want there to be a true understanding that this board and the people on this board, I'm speaking for myself, and if anyone disagrees with me, let me know. We did not pass, we disagreed, and that we did make a recommendation, and that is that neighborhoods are all treated fairly. We are all in a tourist area. We're all, so I don't have a problem with looking at additional things. I'm okay, I'm an open-minded person, even though I can voice my opinion on this right now, I can be swayed, but I just need to clarify that. I think we did our job, and I would, and if the administration and the county has some sense of what they would recommend, then why don't we start with what they recommend? Because I'm not getting it. Fairness is important to me.
Okay, well, fairness is one side of it, but when you look at each of these individual little neighborhoods, they all are nuanced differently, and some of them really are, terrifying to get in and out of, and some of them are dead ends that you can't get around, and that's different from an area like mine or yours or somebody else's where you have an alternate street you can go on. And those are the type of things that I think we need to look at specifically to see if a flat 15% is reasonable in there. And I think that's what
Okay.
the county commissioners want from us is something that's defensible, but also rational for the people that are living there and vacationing there.
Lauren Romaine for the record. So what I'm hearing from the fire department is that there's not an issue. They're okay with what we've got. However, I will also say that in my neighborhood, I've got an area where within my neighborhood is a one-way in and one-way out. So where do we stop? I'm trying to help now. Now I'm on board because I've voiced my clarification paragraph. Now I'm trying to help you get this process because now we have to go through it. What I see is people saying, well, there's one way in and one way out. In my neighborhood, I've got 3 streets that is one way out. So where do we start or where do we stop? I don't know.
But let's, for the record, what I heard from the fire department wasn't that we're okay with this, because I think that would be irresponsible.
I think
It was,
what the fire department said is there's no difference between a 27-day resident and a 29-day
Right.
resident. So I don't think it's really in our domain. And I think unless the fire department is going to put rules where they're condemning areas because they're too dangerous or they won't allow remodels or they're doing things, I would be against us limiting any particular neighborhood where people have already bought their homes or they're renting them less than what other people get, like 15%. I would say if that's the bottom line, the base, then they should be permitted to do that unless they've agreed to a private homeowners association and they consented to the rules of that when they bought their property. If it's not a private homeowners association, it should be a blanket 15% if that's what the board decided. And I wouldn't want to say that the guy that's at the top of Lookout Road that has a house up there that he rents, because the fire engine has to go around a circle and it might take him an extra 10 seconds, should be disadvantaged unless the fire department says they shouldn't be living there. Because it doesn't matter to me whether it's 10 people in that house that live there full time, or he's renting to 2 guys that are just coming up to golf. It's still an evacuation problem. We had a house burned down from me a number of years ago. And I remember, I think it was a fire lieutenant, I don't remember his name, they did a great job limiting it to that one house. And he didn't complain that our roads are narrow. He simply said, if it had been 2 weeks earlier, there would have been so much snow up here, we wouldn't have been able to get the engines up. So we have other issues besides just a few more people renting for 27 days or less. And the fire department's the best department to decide if there's safety concerns. I don't want to see them limiting certain neighborhoods under the guise of safety unless there's really a logical safety reason. They got rid of the entire neighborhood up to Zephyr Cove, and, you know, it was a traffic jam, but they got it done. I don't think there's any way to predict what neighborhood's gonna have a fire.
No, there certainly isn't,
Keith,
Chris.
for the record.
One second,
You know,
Keith.
go ahead,
One-
go ahead.
One
Go ahead.
second, Chris wanted to say something.
Chris Rowlett for the record. So just to clarify, what I mean, or what I meant as far as where the fire department stands on that is, we're not gonna take 2018 code and apply it to neighborhoods that were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. We only apply current code to current building projects. And I hope that makes sense, is because we're not rezoning something, we're not,
Something singing.
It's not me.
Are you singing, Patty?
That's Keith's. Keith gave that to the county.
I'm turning it back up.
It's gonna blow up in a minute.
Sorry, that's my clock.
Okay.
It's all Keith, it's Keith's fault.
So AJ Hames, for the record, just to build on what Chris is saying, there's a difference between code, which we don't apply retroactively. You can't take code and say, based on this code, these people can't have a VHR. But you can still consider just generally as one of the factors that you look at when you're trying to determine density, you can still look at safety. There's nothing that would prevent you from considering safety as a concept in assessing a density limit. There are many factors. Safety could be one. You guys have talked about street size, fire safety, entry and exit points. You've talked a little bit about availability of parking. That could be a consideration. Distance to public transit could be a consideration. There are any number of factors that could be used to set density within a neighborhood. And so I think that this discussion will be most productive, I think, today if we start to identify some of those factors, because that ultimately is what makes the density legally defensible. We've assigned a density and it's based upon our consideration of these 8 factors or whatever it is that you guys choose.
When you say density, you're talking about occupancy.
No, density as the code describes density as neighborhood density, so the amount of homes within a neighborhood that are assigned a VHR permit.
If it's not occupancy, if it's just the structures, then there's no difference whether it's rented or not. But my point is simply, if you're worried because somebody's renting to 10 people instead of living there like a family of 4, like I rent my own house when I go out of town or something like that. I'm an owner occupied, so I'm not like maybe the majority are actually out of town owners that don't live in Douglas County, and maybe they bought a place to just strictly rent. But what I would say is, because it's seasonal here, if they really are not living there like I live in my home, has anyone actually done a study or looked into the fact that, oh, maybe they're renting 100 days a year, but there's less occupancy for that structure over the course of a year than if somebody had bought it and lived there full time? I'm like, when the evacuation numbers are in, maybe VHRs actually make it easier to evacuate, because if it's not July 4th, then a lot of them are empty. And those people don't have to get on the road and block my exit.
Yeah. AJ Hames, for the record, what you're saying makes sense. Occupancy could also be a factor when we talk about density, but when we talk about density as a group, as assigned by the Board of County Commissioners, they've assigned this group to discuss density. What they want, based upon the context that they use, and I'm not saying it even makes sense, but when they say density, and when they put density in the code, they're talking about how many houses in the neighborhood are eligible for a VHR permit. So you have 100 houses in your neighborhood. When we say 15% density, we mean 15 houses can have a permit. That's what we're talking about.
But how does the number of houses, other than occupancy, affect safety? If you're talking about escapes from fires and things, what is the safety factor in density then? I only see occupancy and how many people have to flee. What is the other consideration?
Well, occupancy is distinct in the code. The code deals with both occupancy and density. And I didn't,
Okay. If you can point out what safety factor density has, I can better understand it. Because all I see is occupancy. I don't see any other safety factor in density, although obviously a multi-family housing may have a higher density and there may be more people that have to leave. But to me, it doesn't matter whether they rented it or they were living there 12 months a year. They still have the same risk.
Keith, I know I cut you off before. Please carry on.
Sorry, were you talking to me?
Yeah, I was just saying, I know I cut you off before, so.
Yeah, thank you. You know, if they want us to go through neighborhood by neighborhood, I'm willing to, you know, for those of you who know me, I have strong, very strong opinions, but I don't hold on to them very tightly. I guess I share many of Lauren's comments. I am, and let me just state a bias. You know, as I work through things in my individual HOA, what I've noticed is a propensity for people to have an opinion and then look for things that support that opinion. And I'm guilty of that myself. My concern about reducing some neighborhoods is that we will push either the number of VHRs or the number of nights per VHR to other neighborhoods. You know, even if you keep the 600 and you ban them completely in one neighborhood, there'll be more market incentive to go to other neighborhoods. And so I've got that in my mind, and I'm trying to deal with that bias. And I will try to do my best to understand that bias as we go through this. But I guess I share many of the comments. I'm gonna need more than the roads are only 20 feet to really get behind this. I mean, and look, because let me just tell you an example. On the 4th of July, there was a house fire on one of those feeder roads in the Kingsbury Grade. I think you probably all remember it. One of the people I was having dinner beside were there. They were blocked. They couldn't get out. The exact same thing, if you had added a tremendous wind, would have spread house to house. All the people in that could not get out. And this was not in any neighborhood. This was not in any unique neighborhood. It was one of the streets. And so if we're truly gonna say that there is some fine line between this is a habitable neighborhood, but not habitable for VHRs, I'm gonna have to get a lot more precise than what we're doing. You know, and I guess I would go through all the criteria. You know, we all have GPS now, so having a short turn is dangerous. It is dangerous for a VHR. It is dangerous for a non-VHR. You can get rear-ended on Highway 50 if there's a short turn. Fire, all of these criteria, we have people living in these neighborhoods. So again, I'm willing to talk about them. I'm willing to consider, I'm willing to keep an open mind about, are there certain attributes which make it more dangerous for a VHR than a non-resident? I'm willing to consider that. But again, my starting off point is I don't think these criterias, as someone said, 27 days versus 32 days, I don't think they necessarily matter. I am willing to look at them. I am willing to think through these things. I do like the grouping that Mickey has put together, because Mickey, you know, you and Lauren probably have the most experience with all the neighborhoods. Of all the people on this committee, I probably lived in Tahoe the least. So, you know, if we were gonna do the the 5 or 6 number ones, it would give me time to drive those neighborhoods and look. But I'll just say, you know, kind of mimicking what Lauren said, it wasn't that I kicked the can down the road. It wasn't that I wanted to talk about it. I just fundamentally disagreed with the process. But I am willing, because we were asked by the county commissioners to go through a process to look neighborhood by neighborhood. But I would think that more often than not, I'm going to come to a decision that there's no reason to lower it more than any other neighborhood. But I'm willing to go through it. So thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Just real quick, I think logically, we all know this, that the homes in all the different areas are occupied by, we've done the study, Lauren and I, 1 or 2 or 3 people. And then when you have the vacation rentals added in there, you know, the numbers explode exponentially. And I think that's where, at least I was coming from, as far as evacuations and safety and cars and that kind of thing, is we can say all day long that, if it's fair for a resident, it's fair for a vacation renter. But in a neighborhood, on average, the residents, the number is very much smaller than when it's July and August and you have suddenly 50, 60, 70 more people in the neighborhood. And that's a small neighborhood. I don't even know what, I'm sure it's that much higher up on Kingsbury and in some of the bigger areas. So, I dismiss that argument for that reason. Lauren?
Okay, so, it's funny, it's like we're saying, okay, here's a set of parameters, you have to agree with this set of parameters, and we're saying, we don't agree with that set of parameters, but we agree with this. We're agreeing with something different. And to me, number one is enforcement. If we have an area where there's problems with parking or there's problems with anyone on a road, then enforcement has got to fix it. I mean, it goes back, and we've said it over and over. Enforcement is key. Enforcement.
But this discussion is limited to density.
Well, I understand. And then density, but I understand AJ's defining density. Density is the 15% is what we're talking. What if you look at that and you say, well, in neighborhoods that have roads less than 20 feet wide, you limit occupancy to 4. I mean, is that something that then reduces the parking, the issues where there's appropriate amounts of people coming in and not inundating a neighborhood with 20-foot wide? What I'm saying is I think there's more to this than what we've been handed. And I think we need to have an open discussion about, instead of moving the 20 VHRs in one neighborhood because they only have 20-foot wide roads, maybe you limit the occupancy, and that way you're not inundating another neighborhood with more VHRs.
Madam Chair, ma'am.
Oh, AJ.
AJ Hames, DA's office, for the record. I think that the discussion's getting a little bogged down in safety. I think that we're talking about safety, but density does not necessarily equal safety. And so I think it would be helpful to, my take, listening to everyone's discussion, is that everyone sort of thinks that basing density on safety is really not doable because residency is residency.
If it's not safety and the fire code, then what are we basing the density changes on?
Exactly, that's what I think that the discussion needs to move forward. What other factors are relevant to density? Are there any, and if so, what are they?
Glenn Wilson for the record. We already have the fire department evaluating the structure for occupancy. They come by and they can designate based on the parking, the actual parking code. So these are all things that are already done to equalize things for each individual home. But I wouldn't want to tell some individual homeowner that complies with all those things and the fire department thinks he can have 6 people at his house, that he's no longer entitled to a permit because 10% of the people in the neighborhood already have, and we have somehow figured out that 10% is the magic number for density for that neighborhood based on something that I would not be able to figure out.
Okay, well, that is the point of this discussion, is to figure it out. And you don't have to only look at street width and safety issues. You can look at distance to commercial corridors. You can look at distance to recreational corridors. You can look at distance to public beaches or ski resorts. You can look at access to public transportation. You can look at
But the entire Tahoe Basin is tourism. So what are the factors besides occupancy that are going to drive the density decision? I don't see any. I'm asking for them. All those factors like driving to the beach exist for everybody. I'm trying to figure out why it makes a difference depending on what neighborhood it is as to whether they should be eligible for VHR.
Yeah, I'm not trying to argue with you. I don't care where this goes. I'm not even a board
Okay.
member. I'm just trying to say that you've been tasked with determining density. You have, based upon your discussion, come to the conclusion, at least, it seems like at least 3 of you, which would be a majority of the board, are concluding that density cannot just be based on safety issues. And so my suggestion as legal counsel, because ultimately I will have to defend your density recommendations, is that you come up with other factors. And I started to list some just to get your mind working, but the
Okay.
point of this discussion is not for me to tell you what to do. I'm just trying to help you broaden the discussion a bit so that we can determine whether or not density limitations can be made on a neighborhood by neighborhood
Did
basis.
the commissioners give any extra insight when they asked us to do that?
Not specifically, no.
Ernie Strelo, for the record, it's in your packet. I did excerpts from that meeting. So they wanted us to come back in October and present to them a density proposal, right? If you change nothing, you change nothing. That's fine too.
They also liked the information that was included in the study on road widths and ingress and egress and that kind of thing. That was important to them because they had heard from several neighborhoods who felt that 15% was even too high in some of the smaller, close-knit neighborhoods. So they wanted us to very specifically look at this
Did they say why it's
data.
too high? I mean, other reasons like noise or garbage or parking?
I think it's all of the above.
Because those things are already addressed and
Yeah.
Ernie ensures compliance with his department on all those things individually. So I'm just trying to wonder what we're gaining by dividing up the neighborhoods. Because each individual permit is issued for each individual occupancy and parking, and the fire inspection has to be passed and all those things. So I'm just kind of lost what the density is going to add for the commissioners, and apparently they didn't say.
Not specifically,
Steve
no.
Bach for the record.
Yes.
You know, going back to what AJ said, you know, I'm open-minded about safety, but it's gonna take something, it's gonna have to move me away from an established position, but I'm open-minded. When I go to the other things, to me, density makes more sense about distance between houses. It's either safety or it's convenience or impairment or you know, the peaceful enjoyment. They didn't like our 100-foot rule, but to me, if you wanted to create something besides safety, yeah, you'd basically say that it takes 50 feet in between a house to have anything. But yeah, again, that's just completely random. But you know, AJ, as far as I'm concerned, I've listened to what everybody else has, but to me, that would be the only other thing to say, why shouldn't these things be more dense? It would be, but and again, it comes back to the house by house by house, because you know, we're always talking about the one-way streets in a neighborhood that's not otherwise one-way streets. You know, you could get to, you have to have a certain amount of space between homes to have a VHR. But that would make sense about nuisance. But, and by the way, completely metric driven and defendable. I don't think anybody could ever say that, you know, your chance of disturbing a neighbor is less with 25 than it is with 100. But if it wasn't for that, again, you know, if you take off safety, I don't know what criteria you would use other than nuisance. And then we could spend time talking about what, you know, what properties create more nuisance.
AJ Haynes for the record, if I may, Madam Chair. So I have heard at least 3 concepts, possible factors that the board might be. One was safety, which was not a lot of appetite for, but at least that was an idea. Lauren brought up ability to enforce regulations. Is it possible certain neighborhoods you can enforce regulations easier than in others? I don't know. Certainly some are farther away from county offices, but I don't know if that's relevant. Distance between homes, which Keith just brought up, would be a third possible factor. So those are three factors at least for possible consideration for a discussion on density. I don't think I've heard any additional ideas up to this point.
Reducing occupancy in places where parking is an issue.
That would be like an alternative, instead of reducing density, reduce occupancy within certain neighborhoods.
Right.
Okay.
And Lauren remained for the record, and I guess my rationale for that is that that house is a home, and it does allow for a certain normal occupancy of that building. So there may be a difference between normal occupancy and VHR occupancy, because none of us would live the way we live when we go to rent a VHR for 365 days. So I do believe there's a difference in that level, and that maybe a reduced occupancy due to the constraints on a neighborhood, but you're not limiting the percentage of, you're not restricting that person's ability to rent in that neighborhood. If I could switch gears for just a second. So what I heard you say at the beginning was, if we don't make a recommendation, the administrators will. Can I hear from you guys as to what you feel we need to look at? Because I would hate for us to talk and talk and talk and have a rational plan and whatever, only to be kind of sideswiped by the county folks with some other idea that we never discussed.
Well, can I just say that if we come up with a recommendation,
Yep.
that's what Ernie will present.
Oh,
If we do not come up with a recommendation, staff will come up with a recommendation.
okay. Do you have a direction that you feel, are there certain neighborhoods you feel that we should be looking at for certain reasons? I mean, specifically, you know.
So that's kind of a loaded question. So we have like 5 or 39 neighborhoods that we currently, most of which have VHRs of some sort. I think there's 4 neighborhoods that we counted that are,
That don't.
one's a trailer park, and, there's some that are just, they don't have VHRs in them, or they don't have them, they will never have them. Some of the criteria, to answer your question, just in my experience, and some of you guys have been with me, I think, and driving around. Some of the neighborhoods, like the Lincoln Highway, you've heard me talk about, if I drove my truck down during the snow down in Lincoln Park, I'd take a mirror off my truck, right? So the thinking here, Glenn kind of talked a little bit about this and was trying to understand density versus people and stuff like that. I think it's pretty clear that a resident probably only has 2 people or 3 people. I think we agree with that. When you have a VHR, you have a higher density. I don't know what that is. It depends on what
Higher occupancy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, higher occupancy. So it could have 6, 8, 10. In small amount of cases, there can be 16, like we talked about today. So with that brings cars, right? So maybe you have 2 cars, and if you rent it out as a VHR, you have 4 cars or 5 cars or whatever we allow, right? And so we've been diligently on every renewal taking away cars. I don't know if you guys knew that, but we've been trying to reduce the amount of cars that are allowed on a permit period to try to limit that a little bit, because the question you talked about, Glenn, on density was, if you have a 15% density neighborhood, it's a tight neighborhood, you're right, the houses are occupied regardless, long-term, short-term, but you may have more cars, right? And so that was the only, that's the kind of conversation.
But actually, VHRs are pretty much non-occupied from Labor Day to Thanksgiving.
Good point.
And, I try to rent my house in the winter when I try to escape the snow. I can tell you in the winter, everybody wants to stay for 2 days, but in the summer, they want to stay for 10 days. So it's very different in terms of actual occupancy. Somebody that doesn't live here and it's a full-time VHR, they can tell you how many days a year they're renting, but a lot of them are not renting to 16 people very often.
Right.
So they may be doing that on July 4th.
Ernie's trailer, for the record, I have an answer for that too, because we have done a study that estimates that the average VHR is rented 30 days a year. So that
The average is
30 days a year for the average VHR, right?
30 days
30 days
a year?
a year.
That's less than I thought.
Yeah, that's the average rental. Well, it depends on the neighborhood. It's an
Sure.
average, right? So in Lauren's neighborhood, it might be maybe more of the 30, maybe it's longer up there. And Tahoe Village may be higher because of the snow, maybe, but, you know, some of the other neighborhoods are a lot less because they're more remote or they're, you
So
know.
in a lot of homes, it's reducing occupancy. I mean, but if they're up at the ski lift, maybe they're renting 100 days a year. I don't know.
And I'm not making judgment either way.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you factual information, because that's how I operate.
That
right? So-
can't be right.
So,
That cannot be right.
30 days, 30 days. They're all in your
That's why
neighborhood.
I keep fire for the record. I'd like to see the data, because the mean, the
Sure.
median, the mode, the skew would always also be interesting.
I have
But Ernie, I think that's probably not right, because 30 days is 15 weekends. You know, and most VHRs rent for the weekend. Yeah, you got some in the summer, and then you don't rent every
Right.
weekend that's available. 30 sounds low, but 60 sounds way too high, because when we were talking about the code earlier, I had, people were recommending a cap on the number of nights, and I'm like, the cap doesn't work here, because it's the weekend when it gets overly crowded. It's not Monday through Thursday, it's Friday night, Saturday night, and someone said they can't rent more than 90 days a year. Well, 90 days is every weekend, so it's completely worthless. So the 30 doesn't shock me. I'm a little surprised, but I'm not shocked.
I thought it was higher, but-
I would suggest 40, between 45 and 30, but
That's the
30
beauty.
doesn't shock me.
It's
That's
been
the
years
beauty of
since anyone
TOT
rented my
data.
place for a week in the winter. Years.
Yeah.
So-
Like I said, it's an average, right? So.
Yeah.
And then there's some of the data that we've looked at, that we, in driving around the neighborhoods, is that I have spent a lot of time with, we talk about with the streets. And Chris and I have been talking a lot about how do we include some of the fire safety aspects into the scoring from a county perspective, so we have more of a quantitative approach to it. You can use that data or not use that data, but it would be a quantitative approach. Because, we have to take into effect, from my perspective, that some of these neighborhoods are very, very narrow and they're very crowded. And so during the snow times especially, forget the fire engines. I mean, you can't get cars anywhere, and so if and those neighborhoods may be empty at certain times of the year too, because our original proposal last summer was snow and warm, right? We had 2 times a year we were gonna talk about it. But the second thing is also the gradients of the hills in the neighborhoods, as well as and Lauren lives on Bigler, that has a sharp turn, and you throw some black ice on that, and you get a Bay Area driver that has an all-wheel drive that thinks they're Superman, they drive up the hill and they slide off or slide into a tractor or something.
Can I?
So the 30-day criteria then should be another one of the things we look at, because I can assure you there are many, many neighborhoods that get far more than 30 rentals a year.
Yeah, we can do that.
And they're the ones that have the most amenities.
Yeah, and one of the other things that, we can get that. One of the other things that we're looking at is TRPA, environmental studies on transit, right? Because that, everybody saw the traffic jams. I think it was brought up in here, that while it's not a VHR caused problem, it's a vacationer problem, right? And, we do need to take into account from a reasonable standpoint and to at least align with the TRPA intent, even though they don't have real clear rules from what I've seen on their website. And in talking to some people in the public that are very active in TRPA, I think the intent is to have, when you leave Elks Point, when you leave this area and you go north or south, north, there's no transit, there's no transit corridors. But when you go around the KGID area on the base anyways, there's more transit corridors and it's closer to casinos. So you can, we need to look at those kind of arguments and stuff like that. And I don't know what's gonna come out of that, but those are quantitative approaches that we just need to figure out how to apply that, so we're aligned with environmental policies and driving, getting cars off of roads.
The TRPA doesn't agree with a lot of people in Zephyr, because I can tell you, for instance, they're charging $15 to go downtown. And they say this is to encourage you to take public transportation, but
Yeah.
there is no public transportation for Zephyr, even though we're paying for it. Okay, it doesn't come to me. All they're doing is telling me not to drive my car. So is an Uber really gonna take a car off the highway? I don't think so.
Lauren?
Lauren Romaine for the record, I hear what you're saying, Ernie, and I think it's good that we talk about this stuff. It's the definition of tourism. Somehow there's these people that want to define tourism as casinos and ski areas. Then there's other people that go, it's lakes, it's boating, it's hiking, it's golfing, it's, it's all kinds of things.
Fishing.
So fishing, I mean, there's all kinds of things, so it depends on what we define. I thought this group looked at it and said, tourism is not just casinos and skiing. And so, I mean, the point of this is that there are many of us who live here. I mean, it's not, oh, let's just give it up to all the tourists and let them have it. I wanted blue sky, and I wanted to see, and I wanted to be close to the ski lifts, but I also don't want to turn my whole neighborhood over to tourism. So let's have a balance. And so to me, to eliminate half of Tahoe Township and say, let's all put them just in this one section, is not a right thing either. I mean, so to me, I have looked at that and I disagree with it. I think there's tourism, actually, if you really want to know how I feel about it, there's tourism in Tahoe, in the valley. There's a tourist bureau that says, come visit Carson Valley. So there's tourism everywhere around here. In all honesty, I don't know why they don't have them in the valley, but they don't. Okay, we'll deal with what we've got. So I don't see that squishing them into a certain area is gonna do any different. You're still gonna have somebody who's living in that house. You're still gonna have the car. You're still gonna have the cars. So if we limit them to a certain area, there's still gonna be occupancy in the house that already exists. So what are we doing? We're just moving them into some neighborhood, and now we're gonna have, look, let me say this too. I am not saying that VHRs are all problems. But if you have a VHR that's full of 99 nuns and they never make a noise and they bring one big van, nobody's gonna care. So the issues we're truly talking about here are the VHRs that are a problem, okay? Because if they weren't a problem, they're not a problem. Does everyone understand that? So if you move VHRs into this, you are moving the problem ones into just a few neighborhoods. And to me, it's not fair. If you want to allow them in Tahoe Township, they should be allowed equally throughout. Now, we're still talking about different factors, but I don't see a factor as being transportation, because if we move the VHRs out of Glenbrook, then we're gonna end up with somebody living in Glenbrook with a car. So I don't see the difference. Am I missing something?
This is Ernie for the record.
Okay.
That's your opinion, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you guys are tasked with coming up with a process, figuring this out.
Yeah, I'm
not
just
me.
asking if I'm missing
I've already
something.
done it. So
Okay.
what you're asking, the question that you asked me,
Yeah.
right, was what are some of the criteria the county's looking at? A lot of it's been in your packets in the past, so a lot of the details already in the packets
Right.
from 6 or 7 different meetings, right?
Right,
So,
no.
but, the things, we'll just go back to what the facts were, the details that we looked at. We measured the roads, we did average distances, Keith brought up distances, we did look at all the neighborhoods and looked at average distances between houses as part of our grading criteria. We looked at parking, we looked at, ease of travel. If you can get off Highway 50 into the neighborhood and get off of the neighborhood without, excuse my language, grabbing your ass and hoping you don't get hit. Because it's happened a couple times for me. And, so there's, those are criterias, right? You have a person that's not familiar with Highway 50, trying to make a right-hand turn to go to a neighborhood up in Zephyr Cove, and they get whacked, because these guys are zipping along. But, those are just one of many criteria, and we scored it appropriately. And then graded the neighborhood based on, just the data, right? It was a Likert scale, and it was all graded. And so those are the things that we looked at. All I've said in addition to that, what we haven't looked at is fire, and that's why I talked to Chris. That's why he's here today to talk to us about international fire code and applications, because we see a lot of it in different public comments that come in about international fire code. People from the public have written letters about it. I needed to have a fire professional tell us about it. I'm not a fireman. And then the second thing is that the density, the narrowness of the roads, from my opinion, that is an opinion, but it is, the densest neighborhoods on the Lincoln Highway are the smallest streets, and if you're lucky, they're 20 feet, right? And so those are things that we graded. We use the Likert scale on the grading and the condition of the road, right? And the angles of the road, right? Some of them are simple roads and some of them aren't. And so, and it just played into the total score, that's all.
Right.
So it wasn't like a standalone decision. And so, and then if you remember, I just I scored it and suggested densities based on that information. What Mickey did is that she took the same chart, because we talked about it earlier this week, and she thought it would be easier to break it into 6 chunks, 6 sectors, or whatever, I don't know what you called it. Groupings, and just kind of did it that way to simplify it, because we have to go back in October and have something, right? And so it would be easier if we had a method that we all, talked about and present, versus we can't agree, and then we end up having to do it again in the county, and so, now, there's, there are, certainly you guys are familiar with the commissioners, and there's a couple different opinions. I think that you brought some of those up where there's commissioners that don't want anything in certain areas, and then there's commissioners that think like you do, that it should be equally distributed, right? And so that's really what we need to come together and figure out how to go present that. And I'll present whatever you guys come up with that you can agree to, So I'm not stuck in the mud on. I did a quantitative study. If you want to do interviews, you want to go talk to people. Glenn, you talked about talking to HOAs, which we pulled data already on that. And I'll share anything you guys want that'll help you. That's all.
And let me, if I can ask McKay a quick question, Lauren Romaine for the record. I'm not sure I understand the grouping, so I'm going to try and help move the process along. I'm not sure I understand the grouping, but if that's how, because
Well,
it depends on to me, it depends on what factors we're considering as an issue.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, to me.
But we hadn't had this
yeah,
meeting
right,
yet, so
right.
I was just coming up with something that I thought might help us get through it in a more expedient way than driving through 39 neighborhoods
Yeah.
individually and measuring the streets or whatever you were gonna
Yeah.
do. The other thing that I think we do have to take into consideration that has to do with transit and all that is, I don't know how much involvement everybody has in what goes on with the city or the Tahoe itself with LTVA and TDVA. And there's the Tahoe stewardship plan, and there's the Clean Tahoe this, and there's, I don't know, 8 or 9 agencies working independently, which seems ridiculous to me, but trying to manage our tourism. And I know that a quote by Carol Chaplin this past week was that we're trying to manage tourism now, not, I don't think she said encourage it, because that would be against their
Right.
thinking, but that now they've gotten to where they have to manage the tourism. And I think part of managing tourism would be us managing the number of cars and houses and that kind of thing that are bringing people in.
But let me just say, if you have 600 VHRs and you allow 15% in a neighborhood, when those people aren't here, if they're not VHRs, they're going to be occupied by someone else. So they're going to have cars. So if we move them to another section, then we're just going to have people and cars in those houses. Now, there'd be a difference if we were approving the building of houses, but we're not. These are going to be occupied. So I'm not seeing a difference in what you're saying as far as where we need to help them. Yes, I think they need to do that job, because we've seen from Fodor's that they're saying don't come to Tahoe anymore because we've over-touristed. So I agree with you, but I, in a way, don't, because I'm not seeing where if we pull them into a certain area versus another area, what difference does that make?
I'm not even saying we pull them from one place to another. I'm just saying
Okay.
it's one of the criteria
Okay.
I think we should look at, along with if really there's areas that only have 30 days per year occupancy, then great, give them their 15% or whatever the top line is. But if there's areas that have 80 days per year or some number that we come up with, then perhaps that number needs to come down a little bit so that there isn't as many. I just think it's a criteria we can look at.
I think that'd be interesting
You
because,
know, radius, because, you know, we're talking about, I think radius wasn't the word we used, but how far a VHR is from each other. And I know we talked about it when we were looking at recommendations, and we thought it was too cumbersome. And I'm now learning that radius isn't cumbersome at all, if it was something we wanted to look at. And of course, occupancy, we both know that occupancy has a lot to do with density,
yes,
even though they're two separate things.
right.
So what I'd really like to do today is, you know, I think we've come up with a good list of things we want to tackle, and maybe work on some homework assignments where everybody, you know, really does take a look at these neighborhoods and come up with, because I'm sure there's neighborhoods some people have never been in. And until I started this, there were a couple I'd never been in, but I am nosier than most.
Well, give us our, I guess, Laura, remind me if we're, just give us our homework assignment, let's move forward. I mean, I've voiced my concerns over things and.
Patty, are you in there?
Yeah, I'm just waiting until I have a chance to talk.
Well, I talk.
Okay, County Graph for the record. I'm just wondering, since the VHR started, they've always limited to 600, kind of as the max. And then that number has not changed in years. It doesn't look like the number of VHRs are going to increase. And if you look at what's the average general growth for the Lake Tahoe area in Douglas and South Tahoe, look at that growth. So with having that extra growth coming in and all the extra people coming into Tahoe, VHRs are not going to increase. They're a set number. And there doesn't seem to be any future of adding more to the VHRs. And now that we have Ernie in there, we've got code enforcement. The word's out that the advisory board is not just a bunch of pushovers when it comes to violations and people who are not being good VHR permit holders. We're weeding out the bad guys gradually, and the people, and there's more regulations on there, it seems, than ever of what people have to comply with. Why not give this whole system a chance and let Ernie and code enforcement do their jobs, leave the density pretty much the way that it is, see where the problem areas are, and let those problem areas come forward. Let code enforcement try and weed those people out, and then see about making some changes.
And Patty, I agree with you, and that would have been my plan for this year, is to just let the program roll, but that is not what we are asked to do by the commissioners, so we have to make an attempt at working up a recommendation on this. I would like to see the program work and see how it goes. But that's.
But let me interrupt you here real quick, maybe. Would that be a recommendation to say that, hey, we've got all this in place now, where there's this massive growth in Tahoe, so much so that they're advertising not to come to Tahoe. We're not increasing any VHR permits, and we don't have any future of looking at increasing that number of permits. But we have no control over the population of who's coming into Tahoe. And that if you do move some of these VHRs from one neighborhood, you're pushing it into another neighborhood. What's going to stop someone moving in there, and with the price of rent or housing, that 3 families don't buy a house so that they can live up here in Tahoe and split that house, and they have their kids and their friends coming Now we're talking more cars and people in what used to be a really good VHR.
Yeah. So I think what you're suggesting is that one of the things we discuss is letting it go the way it is and not make any more recommendations and give it some length of time, 12 months, 24 months, something like that, and see where the problems arise.
Well, make the recommendation that we leave things status quo, except for maybe some of the most areas that have had the most complaints over VHRs in the past.
Okay.
Specifically target those areas. And since now we've gotten the code enforcement and everything in place, to leave it status quo.
Okay. I think I know what and I think AJ probably has it on our notes for the things to go over. Thanks, Patty. Keith, are you?
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, we've talked, I was prepared this meeting to react to what, you know, Ernie's criteria. And I think the challenge from AJ was, what should the criteria be? And I would rather get the criteria right before we start running off and start talking about neighborhoods. And I would like to talk about it. So for example, if I believe a nuisance criteria is just as important as a safety criteria, you know, maybe shared resources, you know, the HOA owning assets that are used might be a criteria. So I guess I would like to spend whatever time we have before the next meeting, and I think we could start meeting, you know, it's July, we could meet in August as well. I would like to make sure that we're good on criteria, and I would like us all to think about what criteria would we do and bring those to the next meeting. Now, again, I want to point out, I'm still, I guess, I got to where Patty said a different way. I think 15% for everybody is relatively fair. And so it's going to take something to move me, but if we want to look at criteria, I would just like some time to think through. If I was doing what Ernie did, Ernie sat down and created criteria. If I had done that, what criteria would I have? I would just like to spend a little bit of time on criteria before we plan to meet on the number, you know, on these 5 things, or six things next time. I would like to come up with the criteria next time. What do we believe we would look at if we're looking at lower density, or should we look at lower density, would be the decision for the next meeting. And I think you wanted a discussion today anyway, so.
Okay. And AJ, you can probably give us a breakdown of where we're at, or?
Yeah, AJ Hames, DA's office, for the record, just to kind of summarize, I think the board has identified a number of possible criteria, and you may or may not disagree with the ones on this list, but these are all the ones that I heard. And so these are maybe ones that the board might consider between now and the next meeting. But they are: 1, fire safety, which would include things as discussed. HOA input, getting input directly from those, looking at HOA assets, county's ability to enforce regulations in specific neighborhoods, within neighborhoods, the distance between homes. I think there was also a large appetite to look at frequency of rentals in certain areas or use patterns to see where people are already tending to rent the most. Another relevant factor was occupancy, which ties into home size. Average snowfall, availability of parking, geography, the slope of streets, TRPA environmental studies and TRPA transit requirements, access to main highways, management of over-tourism, distance to tourist or commercial corridors, and identifying problem areas or areas where the complaints tend to generate the most. Were some of the criteria that were discussed either in support of or against, but those were all the ones that were at least.
Does everybody agree that that's kind of the summary of what we've been throwing out here? Chris?
Can I throw one more criteria for at least to think about if you're talking? Because we keep talking about fire safety, so water. Does the neighborhood have water to fight a fire if there's a fire?
Oh, only you would know that answer.
And I know there's some neighborhoods that do not.
Okay, that's a good one.
I have no idea. Pretty sure Zephyr Cove has one though, we've got a big tank.
Yeah, you guys have been in your water system.
So how about if we get this list cleaned up and out to everybody, and their homework assignments can be to look at these neighborhoods, look at these things we've talked about, and then we come back and we move on with the discussion, and we throw out some things and we keep the others, and, you know, whatever everybody wants to do. And maybe we start at using, call it group 1 and group 2, or something like that. Does that make sense, Ernie?
Oh,
If we just go through, I don't know that they can get through all 5 groups in a month. So maybe in August, we could come back and, or go with maybe the more difficult, getting in and out of Glenbrook's also an issue for some of us that don't have the secret word.
Just need to go with Ernie. It's gone.
Yeah, I went with
The
her.
gate goes up when I go there.
I mean, how many of these neighborhoods do you think in the next month you would be able to look at? And I know, Patty, your situation's fluid right now until you can step on your foot, so, do you think you could?
Yeah, I'm not driving or doing anything. I can't.
I know, and worst case scenario, if you're able to get in a car, I could take you for a ride. That didn't sound right.
I can get it, I'm on crutches now, which is good. I just don't have, it's my right leg, so I can't drive.
Okay.
Unless someone comes to pick me up here at my place.
Right.
I can't, I'm basically landlocked.
We'll work that out with you.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
First, a couple of things. First of all, I believe the first ones are going to be harder, so I would not bite off a lot for the first meeting. I think that once we get some ground rules established, like the 100-foot rule we started using, once we get that, I think they'll go faster. I would encourage us not to look at many individual neighborhoods. The second is, if we could get a map, I know it's got to exist somewhere, of where these neighborhoods, there's not a sign you're leaving Middle Kingsbury and you're leaving, so if we could get the exact street locations of these neighborhoods, it would help me.
yeah, the GIS map, like the big one you have on your wall.
This is Ernie Strelo for the record. I can send you a link to the map, Mr. Keith.
Okay, perfect.
And everybody, and if you want, to print it, it's probably easier to look at it on like an iPad or something.
It is.
Sounds good.
Because it's, the print, I have plotted maps on my wall, and I don't even think that's big enough.
Yeah, that's electronic sign.
Well, let's look at Kingsbury area, number 1. And let's look at the multifamily, which is number 5, maybe? Yeah, number 5. And then we'll get the criteria sent out to you of the things that AJ told us, and that's,
Actually, I will, I have it right here. I got it formatted for you, I'll send it to you.
you have what?
All the criteria that
Oh, okay.
I have right here.
Okay, so somebody will send it to me and I'll forward it to everybody, so you see what we're looking at.
I'll send it.
And does that sound reasonable? Kingsbury's all in one neighborhood?
I guess I'm not clear as to what you're
Do you see
looking
the
for us
little
to
numbers?
review.
Let me-
Yeah,
Yeah.
You want us to look at 5, all those in 5?
Well, they're multifamily, I thought they'd be easy. Do you want to just do Kingsbury? That's fine too.
No, I'm just trying to get clarity on what it is that you want. There's a whole group there of 5, Pine Wild, Lake Village, Stanford Square, Tahoe Beach Club, Kingsbury Pine.
Right.
Do you want to do all those in 5? You said 5.
Yeah,
So you
Is
wanna
that too
do-
much?
Somehow we're pulling out 5. So
Well, because I thought we should look at single family and multifamily, so that we see the differences in the two, and, you know,
Okay.
get some clarity whether these criteria apply to both multifamily and single family.
Okay, and so you want us to do Cave Rock, Pine Wild, Lake Village, Stanford Square, Tahoe Beach Club, Kingsbury Pine, Tahoe Village, Upper Kingsbury, those neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay. Was there another neighborhood up top somewhere?
And then number one, which is just Kingsbury.
There's a bunch of number ones.
Yeah,
Oh,
Kingsbury
oh.
Village, it's all Kingsbury, but they've been broken down into neighborhoods.
Okay,
Okay, so I don't think this
I
is.
live there and I didn't understand
Yeah, I don't
what you're
think this
talking
is
about. Okay.
too much to ask. So, I don't think we need to vote on anything, is that correct, AJ?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not gonna call for public comment unless you have something to say, Nita. And, is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. And I think we'll close out item number 2. Everybody knows what we're gonna do. We've had a really good discussion, and we'll move on to number 3, and I really don't have,
Madam Chair, I need to take can we just break for 5 minutes?
sure, yeah, let's take a
All
break.
right, so, yeah, thanks.
Come back at 3. That'll give you 10 minutes.
Item 3?
Mrs. Lauren Moore, you and Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Keith, Patty, you can both hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I knew that, but I did it for the record. This is going to be item number 3 for possible action, discussion on potential goals and objectives to frame future agenda items, board member discussion on path forward regarding possible discussion and action items. It says my name to start this discussion, but I think I'm going to pass this to you, Keith, because
Sure.
this was your item.
So, the reason I wanted to talk about this, we had a year's conversation. The Board of County Commissioners, during their deliberations, we were all able to hear where they were thinking on these items. And so I thought it would be good for us to think about what we want to try to get accomplished this year and to put some time parameters. So for one, like the neighborhood study, we just spent time talking about it. So we know that we're going to start going through this. We're going to think about criteria, et cetera, et cetera. And so we got that. Patty mentioned before, we had there's a new code effective, I guess, last month. Should we wait a year or 2 years before we pose another red line? We talked last year about my turnover of permits in areas which are locked because of density, and I'm willing to take that off the table. I don't think anybody else cares about that issue like I do. So, but I just thought it'd be good to kind of do a round robin and saying, what should the next year look like? Obviously, we'll have to look at appeals. We'll have to look at any tier 3s that come up. But as far as an agenda of things to present to the county commissioners, what should be on that agenda and when? And so I guess we've got the neighborhood study, but what else?
Okay, so maybe we should just go down the line and see how everyone feels. Patty, do you want to start or no?
No.
Okay, okay, Lauren?
I'm sorry, I just kind of, got involved with my health issues and haven't really thought about the future yet, other than trying to let things kind of ride out for a little bit, rather than trying to make more changes.
And I think that you were really clear about that in the previous discussion. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. If we wanted to let it go, how long would you think we should go? A year, 2 years, 6 months, before we start considering more changes?
I think the whatever year, whether it be the fiscal year or from January 1st to December 31st.
Okay, so,
12 months.
Whichever normally the county and Ernie works with on that.
well, the ordinance took effect on June 15th. So,
So it'd be June 15th a year.
so you think 1 year, June 15th of '24?
Yes.
Begin deliberations, okay. Glenn, do you have any goals or?
One goal that I think would be valuable as a permit holder is if Ernie could maybe work on them simplifying the application process and the things that are required. I needed help from his department to be able to comply, like I didn't have a list of my bookings for the month with the pay, and I didn't have certain things, and you have to collect so much stuff, and I think it would be good. Honestly, it's a lot easier for me to renew my medical license than it is for me to get my vacation home rental permit. And I think it should be a goal to potentially, and I'm not a stupid guy, I'm a surgeon, but I can tell you it's more challenging, I think, when I'm doing it than looking at my taxes. So I think if we could make an effort to simplify the process for the permit holders That would be my goal as a permit holder.
Okay.
I also think,
Can I respond to that real quick?
Sure.
Ernie, for the record, so just to be very clear, so we were using HDL for permitting since 2019, and we last November we switched over to Acela, and Acela is a database that other municipalities use, like Washoe County and Carson City and Placer County. And so the first year of using the tool required everybody, even renewals, having to create a whole account and put all the stuff back in there, because the way the data came from HDL was not transferable. We couldn't code it over properly. So if you go back next year or whenever you renew again, and if you've been in the new tool, going through the surgery part of filling out your application, it should be a lot simpler the second time around. And the second thing is, and I know Lauren has brought this up in the past about the packets and stuff like that, we actually eliminated most of the packet now. So it's all been revised, and our website's been revised, and everything is links now, right? So we just implemented that a week ago. And so we have been able to eliminate all the garbage that was in there and the old stuff that was from a couple years ago. And then we're revising the test right now. That's our newest thing, right? So
it's encouraging.
Yeah, so I think that, we've already done that, so I'm not gonna take that as an action. But I do encourage you, I encourage the board anytime, if you ever wanna come down to the county office and sit with one of my folks and kind of see how the process is today. There's two Katies, and one of them can walk you through it, and I'm sure you'll be pleased that it's a lot better than when your first experience was.
Great, thank you. The other thing, Madam Chair, would be whatever we could do in an ongoing process when we see the problems to make it easier for enforcement, because enforcement is the linchpin for everything to work properly. And if we don't try to go out of our way to oil whatever enforcement actions can be made so that things are clearly defined and can get done with compliance, then everything else we're doing is just bureaucracy and writing regulations for ourselves, because it's not going to help our neighbors, it won't help the permit holders, and it's not going to help the community. And I think that a lot of people talk about enforcement, but we might be in a position where we can simplify things so that enforcement has a better idea of how to help the whole situation. And that would be a goal for the next year or two.
Okay, thank you. Keith? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I would-
Well, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we ought to kind of let the new code run its course, but what I do think is we need to think about what data we have. We had some complaint data. What is that complaint data showing us that it's, are they in certain neighborhoods? Are they certain, proximity to other houses? If we could get more and more prescriptive about what data would lead us to massage the program, I think that would be good. So occasionally, I would like us to have just an open session about what data would we like to see, so that when we start talking about changes, we'll have some factual background about what it is. So, Ernie mentioned today about the number of nights reported. It would be interesting to know, do people who care less about their VHR have more complaints, and maybe they're over-renting or under-renting? So is there a correlation between the number of nights rented and complaints? Is it the size of the VHR, et cetera, et cetera? So that would be my only other agenda item besides the neighborhood study would be periodically talk about what data we would find interesting, and see how much work it is to come up with that.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Keith. Lauren?
Lauren Romaine for the record. So it's interesting to me how enforcement was written down twice, so I agree exactly with your points. And I don't know, I mean, I understand we're an advisory board, but I'd like to find some way to bridge this gap so that we all work together. The county, I mean, when I'm bringing up data, needing data, or asking for data, that we're working on this all together, and that when we bring forward issues of enforcement not happening, that it's not seen as a negative, but as an attempt to try to improve things. Because I think there's a disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's known. So I'd love to see a way to bridge that issue. And the way we can do that is maybe through more data. And I'm gonna parrot Keith's request about asking for more data, but I know you guys are all really busy. So to me, the question is, if we say to you, like, what data could we get that would then help to drive more informed decisions, and it's too difficult, then we just need the answer, it's too difficult. But we do need some kind of data, and we've gone now a whole year without really, there was one thing that finally came in right at the end where there was a little bit of, oh, here are tens are a problem and stuff. To me, we need to see a consistent something. I don't know if there's an easy way to put together, hey, look, every month just spit out these numbers. I don't know if it's that simple.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I supplied a lot of data since last summer, lots of data, and now you're talking about generalities, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Are you thinking that maybe, like, we had that complaint data where it showed how many bedrooms it was and how many complaints in the different areas or who they came from? There was kind of a graph, and I don't know how difficult that was, but I think if we could get complaint data quarterly, maybe monthly's probably a lot to ask.
We could do that. I mean, a lot of this data that I put in there was just, I stuck it in there so you had something.
Yeah.
Nobody asked for it.
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, so, Ernie, he comes back to the same thing. So, before we looked at complaint data by occupancy, we could look at complaint data by ownership. Is the owner resident in Tahoe or an absent owner? Is it complaint data by management company? We could look at it complaint data by proximity to other houses. So to me, there's just a lot of stuff we could get. But I think we'd start with the data you're already compiling, because we don't want to create a bunch more work.
Okay.
And so the other part to that, if I can, Lauren Romaine for the record, is I have seen a few questions, and I don't think this is our purview, but I'll bring it up. That there's some neighborhoods that seems to be a question as to how the county is looking at these neighborhoods as far as how many and what the percentage is that they allow.
Are you referring to Andy's letter?
I think there's one recently, but there's also been a question of Glenbrook. I mean, how many do we allow up in Glenbrook? Does the county count, if you have two separate groups in a certain neighborhood and this neighborhood does not allow VHRs, what do you use for the 15%?
Okay. Ernie Strela for the record. Okay, so for Glenbrook, because that's what you mentioned, there's 5 different distinct areas that's measured as part of Glenbrook. 4 are part of an HOA, 1 is not. Now, if you've seen a map of Glenbrook, the houses that are not HOA are scattered all over the place, right? It's not like there's a bunch here and then there's a non-HOA here. They're peppered throughout the thing.
Right.
And so our GIS site is accurate with that information based on the map that HOA at Glenbrook gave us of how the distribution is, right? So when we look at North Glenbrook, South Glenbrook, Glenbrook Inn, and Glenbrook multi-units, which is where Patty's place was or is, the condos, those are, hers was a 20% density limit. The rest, the other 3 areas I mentioned were 15%, and they were all tagged with, based on the HOA rules, that they're member-to-member only, right? So that's how we met, that's how we listed it, that's how we stuck it on the GIS site. The non-HOA areas are 15%, period. This I can't remember how many there are there, but they're all listed as 15% of the total amount of non-HOA. So we separated them out of the HOA itself.
So my question is this.
So it's listed as
Ernie,
non-affiliated.
one of the questions I think she has is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is these neighborhoods that show up on the GIS map, they're from a TRPA thing?
I think they
or-
were originally created from a TRPA overlay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not something the county said, oh, this is Elks Point and this is Lake Ridge, like I know with
Is that what you're
Andy
asking?
Huckabee, he's, always talking
Oh.
about Lake Ridge, and it's not really in Lake Ridge, but they call it Lake Ridge.
She's not asking.
And they call Pittman Terrace something else, I call it Pittman Terrace, and it's called Cave Rock Cove on this. And I think it has to do with, how this map was done in the beginning, and I think it had to do with TRPA. Because I stare at this map all the time.
My point is I've seen a few places where my question is, and I do understand, there is no straight line when you're trying to make an answer in Douglas County. Just the way it is. So you have, my question was, okay, in Summit Village, we actually have a condominium unit that does not allow VHRs. It's in their CCNRs. Are those condos still included in Summit Village's total number of allowable places?
I don't know.
And I've seen a few comments through people asking this question about the percentage within their neighborhood. And I'm more than happy to help. I don't, I know it's a rat's nest to try to undo, but I guess one of the things that I was looking for is just the fact that if there are, and maybe I can go back through and find where those references are. I have a question on my own neighborhood as to what the counting of that percentage is, so that
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
clear.
I've found errors in Marla Bay. I mean, they were counting parcels and it should be counting dwellings.
Correct, and that's,
Right, and so I've had those kind of issues come up. I don't know why it was counted that way in the first place.
yeah,
I mean, that was like that when I got to it, so.
right.
So if there's neighborhoods that we can identify where there's a building or something in a neighborhood that doesn't allow a VHR, then I need to know that, because I don't know that.
I'll see if I can put together what those are and send them to you.
Because we need to
it's
put it
just-
on the map that way.
I do understand, and it just ends up, I end up getting emails about, hey, my neighborhood only has this many, how come I've got this many VHRs when I'm only supposed to have a certain
Some of them are
percentage? So-
overlapped and they're combined,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
I think.
And
is
it
what they
is,
do.
it is
Yeah.
confusing, because
And there was another question on something I saw recently where there was a neighborhood and they've included another section, and that section, if I remember, doesn't allow VHRs. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you. I won't take up any more time on
Yeah,
that.
because I
So-
was told they count residences. So if you have a lot
Dwellings.
that has
Dwellings, yes.
dwellings,
Yeah.
yeah, versus how many lots, and that's where I got confused when I first looked at the densities in some of the other
Yeah.
neighborhoods.
Okay, but it's just a clarification for.
Can I, with permission, AJ Ames from the DA's office, I know I say this all the time, but I think Ernie identified as 189 various HOAs or CCNR groups or whatever, however you want to phrase that. We only have 39 identified neighborhoods, so within each neighborhood, there could be some differences in CCNRs and things. The county, it's not the county's job to go find every CCNR for every property and then interpret what those mean and then seek to enforce them. Those are private restrictions that the county really doesn't care about until they're brought to our attention. The code requires us to follow prohibitions and things when we know about them. But, and a lot of times what we've seen too is somebody from an HOA, not the president, not the board, not just some disgruntled HOA person will send us a copy of their CCNR and say, look here, it's at paragraph 4B,
Right.
it says this, and then we read it and we go, it doesn't say that at all. We can differ on how we interpret things, which is why the county's not going to make a ruling on 189 different documents and then seek to incorporate those into the code. It's not possible or feasible or.
My question is this: if you have in a neighborhood a sub-association that does not allow for VHRs, are those number of units removed from the total to get your 15%?
I don't think so.
Why wouldn't they be?
I don't know about I don't know about them.
Well, and also.
No, but I'm just saying, if you did know about them, I guess I guess I'm trying to find the right answer, because when I get something from someone, it's like, are you supposed to count these ones that aren't included, or that don't allow VHRs, or are they not? So if you have I'll send you something on it. see
Yes,
if we
that
get
would be
clarity for
better,
it.
because
So, okay.
that's,
But
I
isn't
mean,
15% of all units not eligible units?
Well,
Yeah.
Well, what if all these
So
VHR, all
why
these
wouldn't
little,
you discount them?
because what if all the smaller sub-associations decided they don't want VHRs, then you're pushing that on. I think it should be the allowable
So in the
units you've
code,
got, yes.
we have our 030B2. This is the amount of VHR permits issued within any residential community. And so that's a defined term, residential community. Shall not exceed 15% of the total number of dwelling units located within that residential community. So step one is to define a residential community,
Okay,
and we have 39 of them. Then step two is to count how many dwelling units are in that community. You're not reading any documents at this point, you're just counting
Mhm.
total dwelling units, not lots, dwelling units.
right.
And then from that, you take your 15%, that's your V8, that's how the code is written.
Okay.
So, we're not interpreting documents and calculating the 15%.
thank you, AJ. And also, don't forget, in the code, we require people to acknowledge whether they're allowed in their neighborhood.
No, I understand, and that we're still gathering a lot of information.
Oh,
There's
sure,
still a lot of
sure.
information
And
out
we're
there that
still a
we
baby.
learn. Yes, we are. And I think, so
Okay.
data, we went back to that and Ernie said he didn't know what I was talking about. So I don't know how to quantify exactly what data I'm looking at, but Ernie did say something about you had a number for how many nights. I mean, all of that data is interesting. So if you're collecting data just on the administrative level, it'd be great to share it with us. But I do think Keith was really good at bringing up violations. That's an important thing, and what type of violations and whether they're in neighborhoods, anything to help us. I mean, I'm sure you can, anything to help us be able to make a more knowledgeable decisions.
This is Ernie Strelo for the record. So I have, I have access to a lot of information. Keith has talked to me before about stuff that he's asked for, that he's specifically requested, and I've tried to provide it to him. I can provide data in hundreds of different ways. I don't, I usually, the data I look at is specific to what I do to do my job day to day and to run my team. If you're looking if you need data to help you decide density, I need to know what that data is. Like, it can't be just whatever data I have. That doesn't answer any question. But what I can do is if you have specific requests and you send me the specific requests, I will provide the specific request to you. And it can't be open-ended. It needs to be specific to what you're looking for. And I will provide that data. So I can, some of the data I create, and some of it I have access to and I don't create, right? But, in all cases, I put it into a graph or whatever that'll help you be successful, right?
Lauren,
So-
make for the record, so I think it's really hard to, not knowing what data you have, to specifically request data. And I would think that, I will, Ernie, I'll put it together. I just don't wanna ask for something that's gonna, if you've got something, why don't you just provide what you
So
provide for your?
you're asked to look at density.
Okay.
So you have to
I'm
decide what helps you decide what density is, right? And then ask for that information.
Okay, good discussion. I think we got a lot of good ideas in that. I don't think there's anything we really necessarily need to vote on, because this is gonna be down the road. We're gonna be working on this density discussion until we get a recommendation, and then maybe at the end, if we have an early meeting, we can add some of this to it. But for now, I think we're gonna call a close to this item number. I am going to get your public comment, John, but I'm going to take it as closing public comment, if that's okay with you. And so if everybody's good with what we've discussed today, we'll move on to closing public comment. That would be you.
Right here.
There's nobody else here. So I guess I represent the public.
The
I
entire
represent the residents here, not the property owners, not the VHR renters.
Can you write your name down, sir?
Say again.
Would you write your name down?
Oh, write
I'll
your
write it
name.
down, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And stated.
they all know me. Yeah, John.
But she
Eaglin.
has to write the minutes.
John Eaglin for the record. I was watching you guys at home on YouTube, and I was going by the agenda thing, and I tried as hard as I could to get out of you what that agenda item number 2 was, and I rooted through a bunch of stuff, and I came up with something about grievance committees or something for people that have been denied permits and all, and then come to find out it's all about density. So, maybe just a little bit of plain English. I was trying to get all the information I could to come in here prepared, you know, so that I know what you guys were talking about and, you know, what I'm talking about. But the only person I've heard that brought up residents is Lauren here. She says, I live here. And then nobody ever addresses the fact that you should be looking after our residents' interests. Okay? Now, when Ernie started addressing his radius maps, and I think Mickey brought it up first, I dug out a couple of mine when people had tier 3s around me and I was within 525 or 550 feet. But then I started counting all the other ones that are inside that radius. And these are the ones out on the edge, and there's 6 of them on the 2 courts up across from me, and then there's the one guy back behind me. So I think what you guys want to be addressing, and this will go to what Lauren was trying to get at, is you're good at data. So Ernie, make up a map where people live that are residents, and then take a radius of there. How many vacation renters are you gonna stick me with? You see, in my radius area, because within 500 feet, I got 7 of them, you know? And there's, on the 1 court, there's 4 vacation homes with only 5 houses on there. So you change the whole nature of the neighborhood. And I'm not going anywhere. I don't just go buy another house somewhere because I don't like what's going on there. I'm stuck with the one I got, but I own it. So I want to see that you guys take care of me, okay? Now, you didn't have to give a permit to Joel, you know, up on the court there, and he's not following the rules, and you kind of implied that you didn't want to enforce the rules on him, but it affects me, because what are the chances that I'm going to go have dinner, you know, with the renters in his house? 0. What are the chances that somebody is going to send their kids to our schools that are vacation renters? 0. So you just shot the schools in the butt with all these vacation rooms. You know, in my day, up where I lived, it was casino workers. And if you were management, you lived out at Skyland. That's a good generalization. But now, they're all empty homes?
30 seconds.
Okay.
Do you want time?
No, let me go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, now, you know, you got either empty homes or homes that are maybe got people that you don't know and you don't want to know, and they don't want to know you on a weekend. So you see how you kind of ruin the neighborhood? And I'm speaking neighborhood as the people basically that I can see. I ride my bicycle all through the neighborhood. I know people all over the neighborhood. They're kind of spread out. But you know, the people I'm going to do things with, you're kind of ruining my retirement. If you understand what I'm saying. People to do things with in my neighborhood.
10 seconds.
I don't know how else to put it, but before there were vacation rentals, I was living in that house. You understand that? And so all this has come on me, and now I'm not supposed to have any say in it? 15%, any percent, how close to me? So that's my point. You might just want to pick out where the residents are, because there's not that many in Kingsbury Village. 245 houses, you said. There's not that many people that live there. And for you, there's only one way in and one way out for that many places. So that may want to make you limit the density. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John, how many years have you lived here?
Since 76 on
Oh, you
Kingsbury.
got me by a year. Okay. I just was curious because you sound like somebody that's lived here a long time, and
Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes.
yes, you have. I got here in 77. Okay, let's close the meeting, close public comment, and we'll adjourn this meeting.